Namaste and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our continuing series, Evenings with Sraddhalu. And we have the honor to have Narad with us, and I'm greeting him. Welcome.
Namaste.
Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste to everybody.
I have looked up the definition of warmonger.
Oh,
Cambridge calls it a politician or other leader who is often encouraging a country to go to war. And there are other definitions very similar to that.
Perfect description for our theme today.
and I'm glad Narad brought it up because I didn't know myself what it means. So we will be continuing today, part 10 on the current affairs. And this time we will be exploring the war-mongering trends. As usual, you may send your questions during our conversation in the YouTube channel, directly on the chat box. Or you may send your question beforehand at our email ID, integralstudies.in@gmail.com. We have some requests from Hema and Nitin. Shall I proceed with the they are asking you, please suggest alternative media sources that are credible and don't serve the one world government agenda. And Nitin, he's addressing the same. I'm curious of your sources of such nuanced cabal knowledge.
Yes. So some of the details which I have shared so far are obviously very nuanced, especially when I described in great depth the interaction that Trump had with Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman and the whole shift that took place in the Middle East, which resulted in the peace and Abraham Accords. And all of this is very important because we cannot understand what's happening today between Hamas and Israel if we don't have that background. And all of this eventually also ties in with the Ukraine war. And so this is the broad direction of our discussion today. But I wanted to give a few angles which will also complete our prior discussion, share some of the media sources also which I could suggest as starting points, as well as then step into this direction of the warmongering trends. So I'm going to take a brief step back to what we have last discussed and then come to our topic today. You will recall in our discussion last time that we ended with the quotation from Sri Aurobindo, where he says that by neutrality, compromise or inner passivity, we can very easily allow the forces which are against the truth to invade and crush the truth itself. And therefore it is extremely important for us to not have neutrality, which means what? That we have an exclusive entire allegiance to the divine will, the divine truth, in whatever way we are able to open ourselves to that. But it also means practically that in life, in our engagements, in our interactions, in the events that take place around us, we, as far as possible, are able to align with that which best supports the divine will or the general evolutionary push, to whatever extent we are able to sense it or understand it. But that means also cutting through the appearance which is deceptive. It means also that we should not compromise, that even when we see something which is a mix, we should be able to distinguish the part of it which is unmixed and recognize the mixture itself at best as a provisional step. But once you begin to see uncompromisingly, the perspective of the world is very strange because we see almost everything is heavily mixed. There is no one party that is obviously entirely on the side of truth. There are always other influences, elements, even sometimes with good intentions that they may have to make compromises. But to be able to at least perceive that without necessarily getting overwhelmed with the complexity of the situation. So this is the second aspect. And the third is inner passivity, that we should not have, at least within us, it must be an active stance of alignment and even of goodwill for all those efforts, individuals, trends which help the forward movement of evolution. So this was the overall point on which we ended last time. We also touched upon briefly, though in passing, the sense of the place of politics in spiritual life. It's not so much for politicking, but for looking through appearances of circumstances and their trends. And therefore, when I look at sources of information, it is generally with this intention, and this is what I would highly recommend for everybody to do that. As a general rule, you do not trust any source. You look rather for the factual content, not opinions. And it's a part of our mental training which we have to take up, which is contrary to all the decades of training that we have had, especially in childhood, where we were practically asked to repeat what we read. The bulk of your training, the things for which you get your high marks in the exams, the things by which you are lauded, applauded, celebrated and rewarded with prizes, is when you are able to repeat what you have read. Not when you have an original thought, not when you have an original insight, not when you are able to go against the current consensus, as they call it today. But the problem is, truth is not built on consensus. Even, and we will look at this later when you speak of climate change and related issues, poisoning of the environment, they keep referring to the current consensus on climate change. No, science is not based on consensus, science is based on fact. Consensus is what you do in politics, not in science. And so you have to distinguish between the politics of climate issues and the science of climate issues. And there you cannot speak of consensus. And so it's a different kind of training, and we have all to make that effort initially to not attach to beliefs. So one of the comments last time also was your sources. The implicit suggestion was that a source is a source of an opinion. And I don't provide good sources of opinions, I provide sources for facts. Opinions is what I will draw from it. Or we can perhaps align to somebody who has done his research and offers you data in a way that even a formed opinion makes sense, but not merely as an opinion, but backed by data. So you have to understand that today the entire social media is designed to create within you false memories, false convictions, which are so deeply embedded that they feel as if they are yours. I mentioned last time somebody who was specializing in planting false memories through hypnosis. But if you can do that through hypnosis under a specific controlled environment, you can do that through the hypnosis of mass media on a scale which is massive, and it's almost unbelievable how powerful this can be. One of the methods used, for example, is to create a fictionalized version of an actual event through cinema. And the result is, when you watch that movie, you come away from the movie as if having seen that happen before you, and all the pictures you saw have become now your memories of that event, which you never saw perhaps. So if you've, for example, seen a movie of the life of, let's take a famous personality, Napoleon. When I ask you, what kind of a person was he, immediately the character of the movie comes to your mind. And you can like him, you can dislike him, you can adore him, depending on how the movie portrayed him. That may have nothing to do with reality. There's recently a whole series of movies which have been made on Europe, in which they blend multiple races in in England, let's say. All of them speaking with a perfect British accent, but it's a mix of races as if they're all equal, and there's a whole storyline made up. It's a different world which is created, a fictional world. And it can be so compelling that it can even shift your impression of the actual historical circumstances associated with what seems to be that period piece. When, for example, they create a movie about of an attack in Mumbai, for example, when there was the terrorist attack and the movie has been created, or a movie of the 9/11 hijacking, or any of the recent trends of making movies of events, be sure that it is a method of programming you to change your perception of that event or the people involved in that event. So you have to be very careful of how deep this effect can go in you, and it is a part of our spiritual training, I will say, to be able to disengage from these preferential biases that are implanted and be able to stand back from your own thoughts, emotions, and preferences to something much more deep, where you can, in a stillness, open to a higher intuition or a deeper discrimination of the psychic. So understand that the news media, even when it shows you visuals of an actual event, is already slanting you and planting false memories for a certain agenda. Not always intentionally negative, but simply to get you hooked, if nothing else, to watch more or to create fear and engage you and so on. The second thing one does when one reads any source of information, even if it is opinionated, and assume they're all opinionated, you look not for opinions, but for data. So inherently our instinct is to say, okay, just tell me who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, who should I support, who should I criticize. And we approach with that intention. You have to consciously dissolve this and understand everybody is in a compromise in a political situation. So some may be tilting more towards the good, some may be tilting more towards the anti-evolutionary or personal interest, and may swing later. Each could swing either way. So deliberately cut through anything which is presented as opinion, but look for the data points, and you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised at how much in the very celebrated news sources as well as famous writers of news who have been awarded, how little data would be there and how much is really opinion. And unfortunately we tend to drink that. So my effort is generally to go to sources of data, and for this purpose often it is useful to see both sides. So if you're going to understand the Ukraine war, you must see not only what Ukraine has to say, but behind it, backing and the cause of the war is the United States government and the deep state intentions. So you have to see what they all say, but also what Russia says. And what is fascinating is, the moment the war started, the first thing that was done was to completely cut all access to Russian information sources. Now, you may say it is state propaganda to watch or to look at, to read anything that comes from RT, Russian TV, Russian television.com, RT.com. Yes, it's propaganda. On the other side is Ukrainian propaganda or US propaganda or UK propaganda. All is propaganda. But in that propaganda, there will be statements of data, facts. And did you bother to look at those? Can you access them? Now, if somebody is genuine, they do not fear opening the sources of data or having a discourse over the data and its interpretation. But when somebody deliberately cuts you off from a source of data on a matter that is so serious, you can be sure that they have something to hide. They're afraid that you might get exposed to data which would change your opinion. For example, when Russia entered Ukraine, the government and the president very clearly stated 3 objectives of their entry, and it was declared as a limited military operation. It was not a war, it was not an invasion. They said it very clearly. And at the same time, they gave the conditions under which they would immediately cease all hostilities and stop all war. This information was never allowed to come in the Western sources. To this day, in Europe, in practically every country, if you try to go to RT.com, which is the source for Russian news, you will find it is blocked by government order. Interesting. And so you have to ask yourself, what is it they're hiding? And my general approach to this would be, if you have not heard the other side, you can be sure any opinion you form, any data you look at is partial or even false. As an opinion, you're certainly wrong. But as data, it is partial, and a partial data being presented as a complete data is false. So you have to find a way to look at the other side. And so I'm not giving you a source. I'm showing you a methodology, and then I will suggest sources which will help in the methodology. But the point I'm making is it's not the sources, it's the methodology that you have to take up. Look also, when you look for sources, look for healthy comments section where readers can give feedback and corrections. Because inevitably when data is given and when there is an opinion or a bias, and they will always have bias, a reader can provide an alternate viewpoint or alternate data or a more complete perspective and so on. And if there is a healthy comment section where you can even debate viewpoints, that makes for for me, a rich source of data. I've found almost in every case when I found an important article, going through the reader's comments gave me at least 2 or 3 critical viewpoints or angles that were not included in the article. Necessarily, because an article cannot always be complete, or the writer has a presumption of a certain kind, assumes that you know certain things, or maybe himself does not know, which the reader gives. Or if a reader makes a statement which is incomplete, somebody else makes a correction or sets it into context. So if you look at this as one of the fundamental requirements for you, because you can't do all the research, you are relying on others to do it, then one of the best sources you will find today, surprisingly, is the former Twitter, what is now called X by Elon Musk. And ever since Musk has taken over and, so to say, freed Twitter as a source, you will find there very rich interactions. And as was already the case with Twitter, that there are the algorithms which watch for your interests and feed you the content that you would be interested in looking at. Among the rich content on the website itself is a source which I will highly recommend. And again, it's a trigger point, so be careful, do not get triggered. Tucker Carlson is one of the very good researchers, extremely intelligent, extremely perceptive, and he has a wide reach of information sources also. And the way he is able to present things, the angles which he is able to evoke and draw out is quite remarkable. Now always you must remember, nothing is complete, but at least it gives you a broad enough base upon which you can do further research or pursue things. So if you go to Twitter, go to Tucker Carlson's Twitter feeds and just start watching the series 1, 2, 3, 4. It's all in a sequence. And then observe for the comments. Often you'll find in the comments interesting viewpoints. People post links which amplify on points raised, or sometimes which contradict or give a complementing side. And so this is going to be for you a rich source to begin with. And when you find somebody providing you high quality content, you click follow on Twitter. And the result is the algorithms there now start understanding what you're looking for and then start giving you material which is broadly along the same line. Always look for the reader comments and posts from readers. And because there's an automatic system where people can vote and appreciate a particular comment, the best comments tend to rise to the top and so on. So just a very simple starting point. There are others which I will also point to as you go along, but there used to be another which was called Project Veritas, which was also on Twitter, which at some point it got banned. I don't know if it came back, but the main person was James O'Keefe. And James O'Keefe would go undercover, interview people, and expose what was happening actually behind the scenes. So one of the undercover which got him banned, by the way, was they did a whole interview with one of the scientists of the Pfizer pharma company, in which the scientist openly says that they saw evidence that the vaccinations had side effects, that it was actually affecting the fertility of women and so on. And then he says in that, remember it's a sting operation, he actually says, imagine if it gets known and we have to make sure that it shouldn't be known and so on. And all this was exposed. And at that point, the power of the pharma companies was so strong that Project Veritas threw away James O'Keefe, who then started his own separate company because he was the heart of that whole effort. But do look at what he had done already under Project Veritas, and then now what he's doing today. It's on Twitter again, X, under his name, James O'Keefe, and his company now is OMG, O'Keefe Media Group. So these are excellent starting points. I will also suggest others as we go along, and I will post some of these links later on. But for now, I'm just giving you a broad approach, and I would suggest you start exploring these. What I personally do is there's a particular app which is called Google News app. Earlier there used to be another news app which was from Google, which was slightly differently named, and it used to be very good for the simple reason that they automatically aggregated material that was being watched by people. So if it so happened that 1,000 people were watching a particular news item, that would be promoted for you automatically. And then as more people engaged with that, it would come up, and so the best, most interesting news items would bubble up and would appear as your primary headlines. Now this was true up to 2016, until Trump became president. What was strange was, with Trump's arrival, the entire media underwent an internal overhaul. New York Times shut its comment section. Washington Post changed its banner saying that in times of crisis, when democracy is under threat, then we have to ban certain sources. Something like that. They gave an argument and cut off, again, reader feedback. And Google pulled out this news app, which was at that time an excellent barometer for what people found interesting and useful. They pulled out that app and replaced it by what is the current news app. And what the current one does is, it does not show you what others like. It is entirely oriented to creating a bubble around you to feed your existing interests. So if you have a certain orientation, you are pro X or pro Y, then it will feed you material which supports your viewpoint, your bias. And you will get the impression that everybody thinks this. Somebody else who is pro Z, who is entirely against pro Y, gets the impression that the world is pro Z, and it's creating artificial bubbles of isolation. Internally, what they're able to monitor is every person's beliefs, biases, interests, to the detail of the point where they can tell you who you are going to vote for. So at any given moment, they have a map of the entire world, down to every country because of the mass reach that they have, and based on your interests, on what you watch in the news or any other links that you follow through your browser, they have already found out through artificial intelligence who you're going to vote for, what your belief systems are, what your alignments are and interests, not just for advertising, but for them to manipulate you. So on their, let's say, the highest level board, they can actually tell you if the world went today at this moment to vote, who would win and by how much, to a precision which is shocking. What do they do with it? Well, one of the arguments put out by the World Economic Forum think tank, one Harara, he says that there's actually a point where we may come to a stage where we don't need to have elections because we know exactly what everyone thinks and we can tell you what you're thinking and who's the person elected. It's fascinating that they even think as far as that point. It's as if to prepare us for a situation where they will say, why do you even bother? Just push a button and we will all have the illusion of an election. Or even that can be discarded because we are already telling you what the current polling is. But the problem with this whole approach is, from their viewpoint, they are interested in swinging your perspective. And what they do, and Facebook has often spoken about this, that they actually do social media experiments. How can you manipulate a person's belief or allegiance? Who are the people who can be most easily shifted, who cannot? They actually do tests by feeding you data and watching how your state of mind changes. Not only that, they can watch your state of emotions through the webcam. So if you're doing a webcam chat, it's actually monitoring your state and reading when you're happy, sad, nervous, anxious, fearful. And based on your current emotional state, feed you data to manipulate you. If you think about how deep this goes, imagine somebody on the other side watching you at every moment, being able to make out from your face your current state of emotions and thoughts, and then giving you exactly what is needed to slant your state and program your beliefs. And can you see how powerful this would be? Especially considering that you have the power of repetition, which is one of the methods of this mass hypnosis, and the illusion as if everywhere everyone is thinking the same, which makes you want to conform to the current belief system. I can tell you this, I am surprised at how often when I speak my mind on a matter which I know is delicate, where I believe that the bulk of the people would be upset hearing it, I'm surprised at how often people actually come up and say, oh, we are so relieved to hear this, because we also believe this, but we thought everybody did not believe it. It's fascinating. And this is happening because of the bubble created by the social media, the illusion that you're alone and everyone else believes something else and you need to conform. Now, I'm just giving you this as a perspective. So when I come back to the Google News app, I know this is what's happening. So I'm very careful what I click, because I don't want the app now to program itself to things which I also openly state I trust these sources and not others. And then I scan through headlines. So on a single topic, I'll scan through 20, 30, as many headlines as Google offers me. And the advantage there in the app, it agglomerates on a particular topic. So if it's the Hamas-Israel situation, you will have like 30, 40 headlines from different media sources. And there's a marker that says 5 hours ago or 5 days ago. And so you get a sense of what is the slant being projected by the media. And occasionally it's interesting to see, at first the media sources give you a very positive view of something, and then the cabal interests kick in and they swing. From the next day, suddenly everything goes negative and the programming starts. And you can watch these trends interestingly. So I mentioned this last time that I scan through headlines typically in a day. But my goal is to watch what are the interests and what is the attempt to program me with. And it's fascinating, some of the things which you find. I've never clicked on a film star's opinions or information about film stars making statements about anything, about who they are dating or not dating. I've never clicked on any of these. And yet sometimes these appear as headlines. And then I know that there is a promotion being built around this particular film star for a movie that's going to be released soon. So there's a whole thing that they call building the buzz. If the movie is going to be released, let's say 2 months down, suddenly you'll have a stream of information about such and such a film star who is now dating somebody else, or something scandalous, or if nothing else, something utterly stupid, such as what dress they wore when they went to the beach, which has set the internet aflame. And I'm wondering, why am I being fed this data? I've never clicked on any such thing. And then I watch. Now suddenly this film star is promoted, and then 2 weeks down, there's an information that, oh, by the way, they just acted in such and such a movie, and then you have teasers for the movie which are being built up, and that's how they build. They tease your mind and build an attraction until they hope to create in you a desperation to watch the movie quickly. And there again, from a spiritual point of view, observe how it affects you. Observe how these teasers are meant to pull at certain strings. If you actually then start reading the material which they try to feed you or show the videos, they are called teaser videos, they're meant to tease and titillate in some way to make you want to watch the movie. And then how they build it. You watch how you're being played. And it's a very useful spiritual training to consciously be able to disengage from the programming, even as you watch parts of your nature being triggered by such a programming. And it gives you a deep insight into not only the technology, but also your own nature, and what are your weak points, trigger points, reaction points, and so on. So this is a broad perspective that I'm offering of what might work and a few starting points for exploration. I will also suggest, if you really want to understand US-centric events, which are completely suppressed by the bulk of it being controlled media, one of the best sources I have found, apart from Twitter now, is a website called the Gateway Pundit. The name of the website is thegatewaypundit.com. And it's what the mainstream media will call right-wing. But actually it is a nationalist website. And nationalist is a bad word now for the left-wing media because they don't like that you love your country. And nationalist is given a negative turn as if destroying or attacking others and criticizing others. No, it's very much love for the United States on what for the United States represents for humanity. It has its biases, no problem with that, but the data it offers you is rock solid. And what it does is often looks at mainstream media news sources and points to things, often with links, of something which was otherwise suppressed but now highlighted, but from a perspective of national interest. So for me it has been extremely helpful because you must understand I've been reading news in this way going back about 30 years. When the internet first came for us here, it was 1988, I think. Since then I've been on the internet, so to say, at that time through dial-up modems, but watching alternate news sources, which always gave me a different angle from mainstream media. So over the years, over the decades, there are certain patterns which I've been able to see, how they build a certain anxiety. And since I know the pattern, I know not to trust that, and often it turns out to be true. But Gateway Pundit is one of the sources where you will find very good content. Do look at that if it interests you. On the other extreme side, if you really want to understand the situation in Ukraine and you want, as I said, you must see the other side. And RT.com is Russia-centric. But as a source of data, yes, the bias is Russian. But as a source of data, it is rock solid. When there's something violently against Russia, it will tend to downgrade it. But anything else, you will find it is largely balanced and insightful. I've even found articles there which are sometimes very critical of India, sometimes not so mature, but they're rare. The bulk of the material is of very high quality. So one of the things you could do, for example, is go on the Russian RT.com and search a keyword, for example, biolabs. And you'll be surprised at what you will find, because these are things which are being suppressed all over the world. But the information you will find that it's a gold mine. For India-centric sources, there are two which I have found helpful. One which is called opindia.com and the other one is called swarajyamag.com. These are two magazines which are online magazines. They are India-centric. They are nationalist in the sense that they love the country, and very useful material which is ignored by the left-wing media. Always giving an angle which makes you understand the use of or the value of certain events in terms of national interest. I have mentioned Project Veritas and James O'Keefe, Tucker Carlson also. But there's one which is quite fascinating for a very nuanced, so to Nitin's comment about nuanced cabal knowledge, there are actually certain writers on Twitter as well as on something which is called substack.com, where you can have many writers and sometimes clusters of writers. I've found some of them to be very reliable with the solid research that they do, as well as insights that they're able to bring about. Offhand, I would not be able to comment on some right now, but I think in the next 2 or 3 sessions, I will give you links for some of these. So there's one particularly which is called badlands.substack.com. It's Badlands Media Substack. It gives you behind the scenes but speculative insight, but with rich data. So they pool a lot of data. They make their speculative assessment. You don't have to believe that. You look at the raw data and then draw your own conclusions. But the data itself is sometimes quite fascinating. So some of these I will post. You don't need to note them all if it doesn't concern you now. I will post the links, if not this time, then the next. But I'm giving you a broad starting point, and then maybe as you go along, you'll find your own. My general trend, though, I'm extremely uncompromising on facts. So if ever I find a source giving me false information deliberately, I will thereafter not trust the source anymore and stop watching them. When they give false information by mistake, they will make a correction for it. They will make amends. They will point out, oh, this was false, we got carried. We failed in our research. But most of the sources that I'm giving you won't have that problem. There are others which sometimes have very interesting articles, but occasionally the false mix, for me, that's extremely dangerous. It is what is called often as controlled opposition. They make you build trust around the content they offer and then slip in the poison every now and then where it is most important, or deprecate what would otherwise have been an extremely powerful position, but they will deprecate it and somehow direct you away. So this is broadly the base I wanted to set. But before we move to the warmongering, I want to set up a very quick background of a few more points regarding what Trump did as well as what Modi did, which then prepare us for the warmongers now. So one of the reasons why the cabal was extremely upset with Modi as well as with Trump is because they turned the full focus of their efforts to rebuilding their nation individually. So for Trump it was make America great again. Implicit is that it was great before and it has lost its greatness, but that you can rebuild to that level of greatness. And he made it a point to explain that it was not against somebody else. Every country should make itself great again. So Modi similarly had this full focus on rebuilding India's base, but in every way, not just economically. Trump's primary goals were economic, secondarily military. But so when Trump started that, one of the implications of this was that you had to contain China. China, not in terms of the people who are wonderful, not in terms of culture, which is very rich and evolved, not in terms of its creativity and its genius in technology, which is also very high, but the Communist Party, which wants to, let's say, dominate the world. What the United States under cabal control tried to do, which post-Second World War was almost as if it wanted to create an empire of America, but it failed at some point for other reasons, is what China has taken up and as if wants to take over. And I've commented on this before, including Mother's comment about the expansion of China and how if China did take over the world, it would reduce the world and make it barren like the moon, she had said. But so this is a background I will set aside for now, but Trump had to contain China's expansion, for which he made alliances with India and made for the Quad, which was absolutely necessary. Otherwise, India did not have the military strength to be able to prevent the invasion and the potential for other forms of harm that China was already organizing within India. So that has come timely. But with that also, he put trade barriers for material coming from China. Now, if you remember at that time when he first did that, the media went so strongly against him, declaring that actually prices would shoot up. Interestingly, prices actually came down, which is fascinating. And the trade imbalance that the US had with China was already set right within about 2 years. And to me, it was quite shocking to see how rapidly this could be done. So this strengthened the US economically. What had happened before, and you must understand how serious this was, over the last 20 years, the US was printing money, buying material from China. China became the hub for manufacturing. All US manufacturing and technology for manufacturing shifted to China. US lost its capacity to manufacture, lost its technology edge. China had everything now. And what was China doing? It was keeping its currency artificially low so that anything it manufactured would be cheap and anything manufactured in the US would be too expensive. So effectively the US was buying from China, sending paper money. China was now absorbing all that money in a huge quantity. The balance of payments made it such that if tomorrow China stopped taking US money, the US dollar would collapse. Literally, that was the point to which it was brought. And US had been made dependent, as I've already said before, on oil sources in the Middle East and so on. Trump reversed that, brought back oil, created a glut from US manufacturing, made it totally independent of Middle East, and then because of this balance of payments correction, made the US no more dependent on China. You see what had happened? Effectively, China was blackmailing the United States government by saying, if you don't do this, we will stop taking the US dollars, and the dollar would collapse. Meanwhile, what China did very cleverly, knowing that it cannot depend on the dollar, it would immediately invest the dollars into other countries, particularly, for example, in Africa. So there was a game of musical chairs. Everyone is running around. When the music stops, suddenly there are not enough chairs. Some people have to fall. If the music stops suddenly and the US dollar collapses, who is left holding the paper? It's the African nations, not China. So they had set up a very carefully organized, well thought out framework in which the US was now entirely dependent on China to buy the treasury bonds which it was selling, which propped up the dollar. China now became the supplier, it's the shopkeeper now. And what is interesting is the shopkeeper is telling you, the buyer, continue to buy from me, otherwise I will sink your currency. So it was a very unhealthy relationship where the US was blackmailed practically. The same money could be fed back now to the politicians and to get them to do anything. There's a professor of the Chinese Chinese politics, and I'll try to get you the link next time, who speaks about this, how over the last 20 years, they had learned that the US works on money, so they had used the money that they got to buy up US media, US politicians, US think tanks, and particularly, he says, Wall Street, the entire investment machinery of the United States. They bought it up because it's available for sale. Everything is for sale in a capitalist framework. They bought it up and used that to shape US policy, and shaping US policy to pressure other countries. So effectively, China, through the US, was bullying other countries. And if you don't understand this chain, you will not understand why the US did certain things, which were inimical to US interests, beneficial to China, and yet bullying a third party country. What was the point? And you have to see this connection. So by changing the trade tariffs balance, bringing back the balance of payments, Trump reversed this relationship and effectively freed the US from China. By building the border wall, he prevented the influx and invasion which was coming. Now, what you have to understand, when the people were coming across and the mainstream media was promoting this as saying, oh, they are refugees. No, they were not. You saw this, for example, a horde of 10,000 people, well dressed. Their clothes are dry, clean, fresh, bright colored. They're carrying mobile phones. Some of them are walking with the flag of their country into the United States. They're being welcomed, given money, more money than the US gives to its own veterans, and then being given free Medicare and free education and free housing. Why? It did not make sense. And if you ask yourself, how are they carrying a charged mobile phone, considering that a smartphone needs to be charged every 24 hours, but you're being told they just walked 10,000 miles? It's not true. And so there were a lot of news media which, in the alternative stream, you could see that there were buses which were carrying them across. And then they found there were George Soros funded institutions which were paying for these buses. So there was a whole machinery, international machinery, which was there to ensure this continued influx. And at a rate which is shocking, 2 million per year currently. 2 million new people per year. The same thing you see as when the Ukraine war started, a large number of Ukrainians were shifted to various parts of Europe, but in particular Ireland. And the people who were brought in were being given free housing, free Medicare and so on, which Irish people who had slaved all their life to pay for the social security were not getting themselves. And this was being given to others. So it created all these disturbances, but also it created a cultural shift. So what happened initially before Ukraine, it was the war in Syria and then the refugees from Syria. Some of them were extremely radicalized in their ideologies. Ukraine at least was not so radicalized, but still the question was, they came with a certain background which did not fit culturally, and what was it doing to disbalance? And the proportions, if you see the numbers, is equally in proportion to the population of Ireland, you could say 30 years down there would be no Irish left. So these are serious issues which mainstream media did not touch. But in the US, 2 million a year of refugees, where are they actually going? Nobody is even monitoring that. So evidence came again in the alternative media that there would be plane loads of people taken from the border to various states across the US at night. By plane, the refugees were taken and then released. To do what? Where did they go? Nothing is being kept track of. And so there was a whole problem coming with that, because many of the, and these are videos again which I have seen, you would see a busload of refugees come, they would step down. All of them were young men, well-built, strong military types with crew cuts, walking with a military discipline, with bags which were all the same for all of them, military bags, getting down from the bus, and somebody then goes there, it's a citizen recording, asks them a question, and they look at each other like military types, make responses which come from military training, and then they walk off, they're shifted to another vehicle and taken away. This open border is one of the most significant, the most serious threats to US internal security. Not only because it could allow an invasion. So if somebody walks into your country carrying the flag of their country and chanting the anthem of their country, what do you call it normally? You call it an invasion, isn't it? They're not refugees. So there was a serious threat there. The full scope of it we do not yet understand, and which we will know in the coming years, because the damage is done. And one of the implications of this was also that many of these were trained military people. Some of them were trained terrorists, including the Hamas training center, which I mentioned last time, which was just across the US border. They were training people and then sending them across. There was human trafficking and so on. But along with it, something else was happening, which was even more dangerous, that you had equipment being brought in, people coming in with training of certain biological equipment, setting up biolabs in the US, which were secret biolabs, owned by Chinese companies. Recently, one was exposed in California. I will put a link to this, but I will speak of it a little more next time, so I'll put it for the next session. One of these was exposed in California. So the local county which detected this, they found there was a water pipe going in, and somebody investigated. They walked in inside an entire advanced laboratory for biotechnology weaponry. That means you're going to create dangerous viruses. They had samples of Ebola, of some of the most dangerous respiratory diseases, including Ebola, an entire freezer just for Ebola samples in the middle of a US city. And including COVID and various others, but some of the most dangerous pathogens, all were being experimented upon, and there were batches of rats. Now, why would you want to breed rats? If you want to test the effect of pathogens, you would test on mice, not rats. Rats is when you want to infect them and then release them into the environment. And each of these were labeled in Chinese. The owner of that was arrested. He was not put in jail for too long, or the basis on which he was put on jail had nothing to do with this actual biolabs. The county informed the US CDC and other FBI and other federal agencies, none of whom bothered to check, none of whom bothered to come. They refused even to investigate. When finally there was a pressure which came from the US Congress, the CDC came in, took a few pictures, went away, did not even take samples, did not test the samples. And after they left, it was discovered there was a freezer with Ebola samples which they had not even seen. There is, from James O'Keefe, the OMG media, they did a sting operation on an assistant of one of the US congressmen, who actually says that we knew this existed several months before. We know that there is a danger of many more such biolabs all over the United States, and it is absolutely a national security threat. But he's asked, why isn't there a larger promotion in the media of this threat? And he says, oh, there were some right-wing newspapers which did speak of it. That's it. why is the whole machinery silent? And the implications you will understand more completely when we discuss biolabs that the US was running, including in Ukraine. And this is the US Congresswoman who states openly they were running dangerous pathogen experiments in Ukraine on the border of Russia, and they had 41 biolabs on the border of Russia. This part is actually extremely troubling, extremely disturbing, and I will elaborate on it when we enter the full discussion of the whole war in Ukraine. And you will not understand the Ukraine war unless you understand not just this, but several other such things. And so this I read from a statement which was made, and this is from a Chinese government source. Zhao revealed that the Pentagon controls 336 biological laboratories in 30 countries around the world. And the US has obstructed independent verification mechanism of what these biolabs are doing. When in fact Russia first invaded, the eastern part of Ukraine, the US government began to take out material from these biolabs, and there is actually a recorded statement of the persons which I will name next time, saying that we are ensuring that these samples do not get into the hands of the Russians. So if according to official position they were doing these for experiments to protect people, then there should be nothing serious to hide there, isn't it? But if they were actually creating more complex pathogens, it is what they call gain of function research, meaning you make the pathogens more dangerous to human beings. And this is what Wuhan laboratory was doing when COVID leaked out from there. And this is what was happening again in Ukraine. Ukraine had 41. And I would ask simply, why do you even need 41? One is enough. And if that one is for your research, let it be in the United States, because the entire research was funded by the US government and the military. All you need is one research center, and the US has several already within the US soil. So why build one in Ukraine? And among the research which they were doing was also the transfer of pathogens by migratory birds. Now this is again very dangerous. Just as rats can spread, migratory birds can spread. If you can infect some of the key birds and key rats, and you know exactly where they are going, you can target countries in a way that is almost undetectable. And there are ways in which you can spread these. So I'm giving this as an example of how serious the whole border situation was, and how critical it was also for the government to close the border. And that is what Trump practically did. What little remained to be done, which was blocked by various other sources, has all been reopened now once Biden took charge. But I'm giving you this as an example to show you how serious some of these actions were. You also noted in the Trump cabinet the largest number of military people in the US history. The second most actually, because the first most is during the Second World War, when you had the military in the cabinet. But this is the second most, or almost equal to the Second World War. Why was that? And you also saw under Trump a very high turnover of people in his cabinet. And I'm comparing this with Modi in the sense that demanding performance. But why the military? And this also we will understand later as we come to some of these, the warmongering trends in the world. One of the key things Trump also did was he took somebody who was from the big pharma, who understood big pharma, and used him to change the prices of big pharma. The US had the highest prices in the world for pharmaceutical medicines. So some medicines which across the border in Canada would be 1/20th the price of what it was in US. And Trump began to reverse all that. So all of this is, I'm giving you a background of changes which are massive. But I'm coming to the war side because all these have implication for war. Trump broke the missile treaty with Russia. And many people did not understand why. The treaty which had been made some 20, 30 years ago of not building advanced nuclear weapons, not building advanced missiles, was broken because the treaty limited it only to the US and Russia. It's a remnant of Cold War mentality. China was completely free of the treaty and was building some of the most advanced missiles, including what are now called hypersonic missiles. which go so fast that you can do nothing. And Russia is actually now using those also in Ukraine. They're still very expensive, but that's the new technology. And with hypersonic missiles, you almost have no protection. And the only protection you will have is using very advanced, powerful lasers. So there's a whole dimension of military technology that has opened up in the world, and that treaty had become obsolete. Trump broke it to allow both Russia and the United States now to build these more advanced weapons to catch up with what China had already developed. Again, I'm putting this in context of the war. You must understand all this before you can understand why things are happening with war and the trends for warmongers. One of the things which Trump did was the delegation of military powers, where things which were held at top down, and he knew the military had become corrupt, he delegated the powers down the chain where decisions could be taken independent of that corruption. There's a particular thing which is not well known, even within the United States, that the US president has some extraordinary powers. One of these is called the Presidential Executive Action PAD, it is called. These are executive orders that the US president can sign, which are so secret that nobody except the president and the person to whom the order goes in the military would know of it. And Trump had a series of these PADs signed, in which he delegated certain powers to bypass the corruption. So they would not know, they could not know what had been done, where automatically if a certain corruption at certain levels in the politics is detected, the military had now the authorization to start an investigation bypassing Congress. And it was precisely to find these PADs, they were hoping at least to find, that the present government invaded Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago and went through all his documents. They made a big story about some of the documents being classified. No, they were not. Trump very simply stated none of those were classified, and whatever were marked earlier as classified, he had already declassified before they were given to him. Before this raid took place at Mar-a-Lago, the presidential library had already negotiated with him, taken documents that they wanted and said others they did not want. So there was absolutely nothing which was unknown. And yet the raid took place. And when the raid took place, they asked for all the television cameras to be switched off. They had everybody go out of his home while they raided every single place looking for some documents which they did not find. And after making sufficient noise about it, you will see the media story is completely silent. What were they looking for? They were looking for these PADs, the orders that Trump had given as president, which, for example, if you find a foreign nation interfering in elections, technically this amounts to an act of war. So if this is detected by the US military, then automatically a warlike response or a response suitable under war conditions would be activated from within the military. And investigations, actions, counteractions, and so on would kick in. Now, you have to fully appreciate this, you must understand there's a huge part of the US military which is still super secret. They have entire programs which are still what are called the secret space programs. And in one of the discussions with Narad, I had made a reference to this before, and we will come back to it perhaps towards the end of this series on current affairs. But there's a whole domain of technology, very advanced, some of which we are getting hints of today, and it was a process again Trump initiated to declassify information relating to flying saucers. And you see currently there has been recently some exposure of people who were part of the committees for investigating flying saucers who are coming out and saying that we actually have crashed flying saucers from which technologies have been reverse engineered. Now these are statements being made by people of sufficient authority to know. So there's no question of a controversy there. But the implications are staggering. It means there's a whole technology basis and a whole group of people operating at some deep level that is unknown to us, unknown to media, unknown to cabal, which can be activated also. And some of the PADs had to do with this. So all this was, when it was happening, there was such a severe threat on Trump's life, threat to his children, family. And at one point, they made a threat to the economy. And I'm going to give this as an example of how it was done. It's fascinating to see. You remember earlier we discussed the satanic aspects of the cabal. So on one particular day, the US stock market dropped 666 points exactly, stayed, and then went back again. Not entirely. The headlines the next day on all the cabal controlled newspapers were US stock market drops by 666 points. Now, nobody gives you a number with that precision. If the stock market falls, they will say 10% drop, 6% drop, or they would have said more than 600 points or almost 700 points. But when they tell you 666, and you know that in the biblical tradition, the mark of the beast, it's the number of the devil and so on, then it's as if the cabal was making a statement, not only to its own belief systems, but also as a threat to Trump. That if you do this, if you continue this, we can control the stock market. And imagine what it means to control a stock market drop by an exact amount of this degree. A number so precise in the fall. And then to ensure the headlines next day have that exact number, what it means. So the full sense of controls, even in the stock market, you get a glimpse of what is possible for certain power interests. And the threat that was given to Trump. Similar thing happened in India when Modi first came to power. The threat upon him was so great that there was a point in which he was not allowed to do anything. If you will remember, and I mentioned this in passing before, that there was one minister who actually controlled 6 departments, and the most important departments, including information and broadcasting, finance, home, law, and so on. And at that point, it was as if Modi was prevented from taking action except some very basic administrative changes, but no critical changes. It's only after that person died of some illness that all the radical changes took place after. So what I'm showing you is cabal has enough control to be able to threaten even powerful positions. And then the last thing which they did, and I'm going to touch upon this because it relates to the war story also, that the ability to start riots on the ground level. In India, this has been seen mostly in terms of religious rioting, where an entire town can be shut down. Sometimes a state can be shut down because of violent rioting. You can see what's happening just now in Kashmir because somebody tweeted some message, not even his own, somebody else's message, and suddenly you have all the educational institutions going on strike and threatening to kill and so on. But it's still small. In Delhi, we saw a couple of years ago when they were throwing stones at the police and so on, and drones flying over showed the stones had been already accumulated on the rooftops of buildings a few weeks before the riots. So there's a machinery of organized rioting which has been already put in place going back a couple of decades, and which can be activated at will. So when, for example, the Hamas attacked Israel, the moment there was the response from the Israeli military to hit back on the Hamas, you saw in every country in the world practically, in practically every newspaper, in practically every university, you had young people with flags with exactly the same message, the same slogans activated, and the newspapers giving exactly the same images or the same messaging, which was, oh, poor Palestinians who are now being killed by the nasty Israeli military. And pictures of babies and women normally. But exact same messaging. So when you see exact same messaging, you know that there's a game afoot and there's a programming happening. But who has the power to ensure overnight the same messages and the same headlines? Think about it. Across the world, across all newspapers, and organize demonstrations in every major university, especially the Ivy League and well-known, most expensive universities and colleges. So there was already a machinery in place. All it needed was a message of activation which was done within 24 hours. Think about the implications. Within 24 hours across the world, suddenly you had effectively riots, demonstrations. And you saw this at the end of Trump's term with what was the Black Lives Matter riots was one side, but much more serious was the Antifa riots, which at that time the media was largely covering up. These were people dressed in all black, covering everything except their eyes. Across different states, in different cities, who would suddenly appear somewhere, do some great damage, set things on fire, set police stations on fire or other public spaces, and then vanish. They knew exactly what they needed to do to prevent themselves from being identified, but the rioting was so well organized and targeted, it was scary. And it was timed, it was coordinated across the US, and the numbers were so large. So at that point, if you read some of the US internal security statements, they will say the Antifa is organized like an intelligence agencies with multiple cells. So within a single city like San Francisco, you might have a dozen Antifa cells, and each cell would have 5 to 10 people, and one cell would not know of another. But when they were activated, they were all activated at the same time with specific targeting, and suddenly you had a dozen flared riot hotspots in the city at the same time with the same message, with the same target. Now, I'm putting this in the context of warmongering because this is actually a form of urban warfare. And the structure in which this is being done is some of the most advanced intelligence agencies, the way they work for their intelligence units. So it's being done by a very highly sophisticated, trained military program in which across the US these cells have been organized, the Antifa cells. What is fascinating, and I will have to show this next time if it interests you, the Antifa flag is an exact replica down to the detail of the Nazi youth flag. Interesting. And I mentioned this in passing when we were speaking in the early stages of our discussion on current affairs, when I spoke of how symbolism continues across. What we thought ended with Nazism, the ideology, the belief system, the powers, the forces behind, actually did not die then. It hid under various forms, spread around, and now pops up. And interestingly, they consider it important enough to maintain the symbolism for its occult force. Meaning they still follow certain occult processes to try to give their actions a certain occult power, back it with an occult power. So what was happening under Antifa was deeply disturbing. The organization was so large, so coordinated that it was impossible. They could not find anybody who was part of the machinery, the hierarchy of controls within the Antifa. How they communicated, at least to this day, no one seems to have spoken about it, at least publicly. And this was being built up. One of the coordinated actions which took place at that time was the story of George Floyd, who died of suffocation, supposedly because he was kneed by a policeman, which I put the link last time and I couldn't discuss it. Actually, it was shown that he was under heavy drug use. He was full of fentanyl. He died of suffocation from fentanyl drug overdose. And the autopsy actually shows that there was no damage from the knee of the police. The policeman was following standard procedure. And when Floyd says, "I cannot breathe," it was because of the drug overdose and not because of the knee pressing on him. This the media did not tell you. And when it came out later, the media did not even bother. Rather, the Antifa activation presented this as the white against blacks. Black Lives Matter was activated, and all the rioting had one messaging: defund the police. Now, why is this important? Because when you have urban warfare of this kind, it's the police which is the urban protector of the people. If you defund the police, who's left? And for a good example of this, you look at California today. In large parts of California today, the police actually says that they are so incapable of preventing crimes that they will not look at a crime of theft of more than $900. So you will see on social media, on Twitter, citizens recording of people walking into a department store with a bag, filling it with all the things that they want and walking out. And the police will do nothing. The department stores can do nothing. And a large number of department stores have actually shut down because it is open lawlessness and they cannot sustain it economically. To those who are warmongers, this is all intentional. They want to bring cities to a level of chaos and collapse by this urban warfare, in which they pit communities against communities, races against races, or genders against genders. And in this way, you have a warfare to which you have absolutely no solution. You see, at least when you have a war between two countries, you can say who controls it and what are the interests and find a resolution. But in urban warfare, and with police defunded, what do? And the direct victim are the individuals, the common citizens, who now not only have their economic collapse, not only they live in fear, at that point they're malleable. What do at that point? They say, help us, free us from this chaos, give us an order meaning bring order, but they are willing to do anything. Just as under the fear of 9/11 attacks, the US citizens turned to accepting the government imposing any kind of restriction on freedom, any kind of control, any kind of spying. When you have a chaos at the level of a city which is ablaze, people will say, get us free from this under any circumstance. And at that point you can impose the full controls of the one world government. So the intention in pushing things to chaos, the intention in starting multiple wars, the intention to having lots of local conflicts and embroiling people in conflicts, directing the refugees from wars into other zones, other countries, and destabilizing existing social orders, and people who have worked hard for all their lives now being denied their own basic facilities and survivals and convenience, and an economic collapse. All these are intentional in order to bring a level of chaos in which humanity will demand the imposition of one world government. At least that's the broad line of this intent. If you understand this, then you will understand the wars. The wars are one of the most profitable means for the cabal, because if you observe, for example, Ukraine, how many billions of dollars, not just equipment, finances have been pumped into the Ukraine by the US taxpayer across party lines, everybody agrees. But where does the money go? Who watches and traces the flow of money? How much goes back as kickbacks to other institutions or individuals? Nothing is tracked because it's under war, remember? So eventually all the documentation is going to be destroyed, very conveniently. You look at the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Hamas received in the last 10 years about $700 million. I may be off, it's 670 or something. $1 million from the US government across 10 years. And what did they do with it? Just think about that. If they actually cared for their own people, they would have built infrastructure, they would have built education facilities, they would have built water purification plants. They're on the sea coast. They would have built their own electric generators to make themselves independent of Israel. They did nothing of the sort. So when the Israeli army steps in to attack the Hamas, they cut off electricity, they cut off water, they cut off the internet, and suddenly the Gaza Strip becomes now the victim, they announce themselves. Of what? Of a dependence on Israel. And where did that 700 plus million go? And this was just the official US funds. There were other countries which were pumping in money. Where did it go? To build this entire underground bunker system and to train the terrorists who want to attack Israel. To buy the arms for attacking Israel. And they are all equipment for attacking, nothing which is defensive. About a month before the Hamas attack, under the Biden administration, some $70 million were transferred. Post the attack, Biden again promised some, I don't remember, $50-60 million, but said, we warn you, you will not use it for war or for buying weapons. It's a warning, but who's going to ensure that it's not happening? Nobody. The money will go into the Hamas hands, and then it will be used as they choose. Interesting. So why this massive funding, knowing that it is being misused? It's not that people did not know. Israel knew, the US knew, because obviously they are also on the ground. They can see these underground bunkers being built up. They can see it's all going to buy weapons. So the companies which control the weapon production, they are very happy because the money is coming back to them. They will actually go and solicit to the Hamas, here are our weapons which are superior. This will allow you to kill more people more easily. This one is not detectable. So they get their quota. They are the warmongers, let's say for now. And the politicians who want this to happen, knowing full well at some point there is going to be a direct conflict between the Hamas and Israel. If not now, tomorrow. If not tomorrow, day after. If not day after, next year. But it would happen eventually the moment you've built up all this infrastructure for attack and bought all this equipment for attack. It's not going to sit idle. It's happening because of an ideology that wants to attack. And then all the consequences which will follow, which are well known to those people, and yet they accept it. And the same thing was happening within Ukraine. So the full story of what was happening within Ukraine, which led to the war, and I'm not saying one side is responsible. The people who are responsible are outside, who did what was needed to eventually ensure that the war started. Are the same people, the same groups who ensured that eventually this conflict with the Hamas would happen. Are the same people who ensure that somewhere down the line, Taiwan and China are going to enter into a conflict of some kind. Are the same people who ensure that Pakistan is building its military to at some point either attack India or influence Afghanistan. Are the same people who, for about a decade, were selling arms to Iraq and to Iran at the same time while they were fighting each other. So the same arms manufacturer were selling, left hand selling to this one, right hand selling to the other, and they're only looking at their profits. And the politicians behind who look at the kickbacks that they get. But why? And why build this whole network of urban warfare, urban guerrilla warfare across the world? And I've given this example of the US Antifa, but there is an equivalent Antifa at that time which appeared in Germany, in France, a couple of other countries I don't remember now, and in India, the equivalent. They don't always use the same name, but the same style, the same strategies. Why are these being organized and who's funding them? With what long-term plan? They want it to end up in a great war at some point. They want to create the chaos. So you have to understand this background to understand where this all went to. I'm going to end with one example because I was still speaking of Trump, why he was trying to stop all this and to prevent these things from happening. So at some point when he was in this negotiation with MBS and the changes were taking place in the Middle East, in Las Vegas, there was a hotel in which the top 3 floors belonged to MBS and his company. Mohammed bin Salman, Prince from Saudi Arabia, was actually present in Las Vegas. Trump's plane, official presidential plane, had landed. They were to have a meeting in this top 3 floors of the hotel of Las Vegas when the great Las Vegas shooting took place. Now you'll remember this was a very strange shooting on the, I believe it was 32nd floor or something, a couple of floors down from the top 3 floors. This person has brought in a few dozen very advanced machine guns and from the window shoots a crowd which is below. And they said he was just crazy and nobody explained why it happened. How could he take so many weapons up to that floor? And the way he was eliminated was also very strange. He was allowed to continue shooting. No one went to his door to stop him until the shooting had ended. And when they went in, they found him having killed himself, except that there were 2 glasses. There were 2 people who were present. The other one had vanished. Who it was, nobody knows. And the entire camera, remember, it's a 5-star hotel. Everybody going in and out of every room has been recorded. All of this was classified. What really happened then? The real story has been entirely suppressed. The only thing we know is when the shooting started, Trump's presidential plane took off, and a few minutes before, there is some visual evidence from amateur video recordings that suggests that somebody like Mohammed bin Salman or some part of his entourage was taken by bodyguards through the hotel lobby and taken out. That's all we know. So it seems, and here this is a speculation, and I'm distinguishing speculation from the data, that there might have been an attack or an attempt to harm and to prevent this meeting. And when that failed, the whole thing was, so to say, spun around into a public attack of some kind. But this is all to give you an idea of how dangerous the situation actually is for elected representatives who are protected with some of the most advanced security, how much their lives are at stake when they question the cabal or when they go against cabal interest in a serious way. On Modi, I don't know if I mentioned last time, there was a dry run of an attack on him when his car was stopped on top of a what do you call that? On the road which goes above another flyover. The car stopped exactly on the middle of the flyover. It was blocked on the front and on the back. And it could not move for 20 minutes. And all it needed was one drone with one bomb. It was a dry run to demonstrate that they could do it when they wanted it. At the same time, it was a signal, do not cross these lines otherwise. That's the nature of the threat. So I'm giving this example to show you that the warmongers are not sitting idle. They're very well organized. They have their own interests, agendas, and the broad agenda is always towards this one world government to suppress human freedom. And to this end, they will do anything. Some of these plans go far ahead. Sometimes things are planned a decade or two ahead in advance. Sometimes they're well known and there is a stand down order to ensure that the war actually starts, and so on. So we will look at some of these details next time when we go in depth on these two particular circumstances of what triggered the conflict in Ukraine as well as what triggered in the conflict in Israel. Interestingly, the mother had some very observations to make about Israel and the nature of the difference between the Jewish people and the Palestinian people, what makes them, dislike each other, or what is the underlying truth behind, as well as the difference in mentality of the mind and the vital nature, character of temperament, and so on, which is all very interesting. And I will perhaps elaborate on this next time. But I've tried to set a kind of a base to show you so many things which were done in the last few years to prevent this, but it's only by a deeper understanding of the war organization machinery across the world and the way it is able to be activated at will. And particularly this form of urban warfare, which is something completely new in humanity. Overnight, within 24 hours, you can organize demonstrations, attacks, as well as rioting anywhere on earth, in any city, with multiple groups targeting at the same time across the city, using cells which are so distributed that the country's intelligence agencies does not have the ability to trace out the sources or the command and control structure of these units. And that's something very new in human history, possible only because of our current very advanced technologies and communication through the internet and so on. So you have to understand the seriousness of the situation even for the people who are fighting the warmongers. Their lives are in threat. I don't know if you're aware this I think it was a Tanzanian president during COVID had made a joke. He took the COVID test and applied it to some vegetables, including a papaya, and it came out COVID positive. He publicly showed this, ridiculed the whole test as well as the WHO concerns. He refused to buy the vaccines. Within a few months, he was assassinated, replaced by somebody else who placed order for vaccines. It was easy to do. It's a small country in Africa, comparatively. Not very interesting for the international press or the controlled press, which will completely ignore what's happening there. But it just shows you that those who dare to go against the warmongering interests are themselves at threat, because the powers behind will not stop. They have their agendas, they will push their way forward. And you have to ensure the backing of the collective, the backing of the people. And we will look at this in more detail next time. I touched upon it last time already. If the people are ready to enter into war, it's easy to provoke you and trigger you to go to war. If the people have matured enough that despite provocation they refuse to riot, they refuse to war, then you can create all the cells of organization you want. There will be exceptions, and the common mass will refuse participation, and this attempt, although it may give a brief spurt of some flames, would die out. All finally boils down to our collective evolution as a people, as a nation, as a culture, as a civilization, and as a species. So it comes down to this one key point: change of consciousness in the collective. Of course, starting with us, but still. Can we as a collective say, despite any provocation, we refuse to fall into this programming, to be swayed by the lies that are provoked by the media or by the programming that comes through the social media? And I started with this in the beginning. How you're put in a bubble and you're made to think the way they choose to make you think. If you can recognize that and refuse it, and stand by a deeper truth of your soul's values, of higher spiritual values, or at the very least, a basic moral, ethical, but not programming of morality or ethics. You see, I'm making a distinction between religious morality and ethics, which may actually enjoin upon you to kill somebody, which is a different story. But a true morality and ethics that comes from your soul's values, of a refinement that recognizes all humanity as one big family. And even the other, whatever that may be, other, community, gender, religion, nationality, as still part of yourself in the larger family that we are. If we can come to this point, no cabal control, no social media manipulation can ever drive us to war, and it will be the end of the wars. If we cannot do this in time, we will be used, we will be manipulated, and the wars will continue in various forms, including this very advanced urban warfare conflict, where in universities you're seeing gangs, groups of students fighting each other because they support X or Y, killing each other sometimes. But that division, that conflict is going to last as long as we live in a consciousness which is built on these values. So this was the mother's observation when she said that as long as humanity lives in a consciousness in which wars are inevitable, well, they will happen. And this is the change that we have to seek. Always beginning with ourselves, but we must actively spread the change in our collectivity, in our community. So one of the objectives of this whole discussion and going in depth is precisely to expose the manipulation. And when you see that you are being manipulated and it's not your thought, it's not your feeling, it's not your visceral reaction, but a programming from outside, you can disengage from it, refuse it, reverse it or dissolve it, and be free. And perhaps help others around you, similar to recognize that this is not the way, that there is a higher stance, there is a better way. But it cannot be done if you don't understand what's really happening behind the scenes and how you are being manipulated, or what the larger agenda of these interests and powers is. Because then they can catch an interest that you have and sway you through that interest to collide with somebody else's personal interest and trigger the war among you. Isn't it? So I hope this is going to be useful for all of us, and we will continue this topic into the next. But I think I've raised the base, established the base for a deeper understanding of the two big wars that we will be discussing next. Narad, would you like to make any observations? You have to unmute. You have. Can you click on the mic button?
Sraddhalu, I think it's better you unmute him, maybe.
I have done already. I've clicked on that. Ask to unmute. Does a thing pop up that says unmute? Accept to unmute? Ah, yes. Now you're unmuted. There you are.
My only request is that maybe you could bring in a little more of Sri Aurobindo's words
Yes.
on these situations.
Yes.
Because he has seen it very clearly also. So clearly, 100 years ago.
Yes, we will do that. Very well. Then let's all concentrate in aspiration that we may all grow more deeply united with the divine presence in us, that all our thoughts, emotions and actions may be more and more aligned to the divine truth and the soul's values, so that no distortion or perversion from outside can ever sway us, that we will be able to see clear and through all superficialities and live by the principle that will awaken a deeper harmony in all of humanity, and that is the self, the soul, the divine presence in all of us, which is one, which is ourselves. And may this harmony spread across the world.